Okay, I want to thank you all for coming out, giving me the opportunity to share with you all. This is a talk that goes well beyond water harvesting. As the title says, I'm also going to be talking about harvesting the sun, community, and more. Because it's the integration of the approach. It's how everything interconnects. It's the relationships that really bring the dynamism and make things go well beyond what might ordinarily be imagined, for a lot more efficiency as well. If at any point in the talk my voice drops a little bit and you can't hear, just shout out for me to talk louder and I'll amp it up. Okay, so I want to give you a little background of where I'm coming from, because I think the situation in my hometown applies to many communities throughout the United States and the world. So this is a photograph of my hometown of Tucson, Arizona, taken in the early 1900s. And this is where you would see the big buildings of downtown Tucson today. Weren't so big back then. And we had a perennially flowing river, the Santa Cruz River. It ran year-round. No longer does. We had abundant wells and springs throughout the community. Neighborhoods named Flowing Wells, Sabino Springs, for the abundant springs in those areas. They're all gone now. And we also had a much more rich and dense sponge throughout the watershed, a dynamic sponge of vegetation and organic matter below. So when the rain fell from the sky, it was the erosive force of that falling drop was broken up and diffused by the canopy of the vegetation. Then the water made its way more calmly to the ground below, where it didn't hit bare earth, but rather it hit an absorbent sponge layer of leaves and other organic matter. So when it did rain, much more of the water infiltrated than ran off. That's changed today. So this is a photograph taken looking to the south of the previous photo in 1904, and this is a photograph from the same vantage point taken last year. So you can see that we've replaced the once meandering year-round flow of river with a dead and dry riverbed. We've killed the river. In addition, we have replaced the sponge of the dynamic mesquite bosques, or forests of indigenous trees, with pavement. So over 30% of Tucson, Arizona, like most urban and suburban communities, is paved over with streets, parking lots, buildings. But that only looks at the official pavement of the, it doesn't look at the unofficial pavement of the large swaths of area where we've denuded out the vegetation and compacted the soil to such a degree that it acts like an adobe brick patio. So we get much less rain than you all. We get about a third of your rainfall. We get 12 inches of rain in an average year of precipitation. But we're now lucky if just a fraction of that infiltrates. So we are literally dehydrating our watershed. We are creating the desert, okay? Because we're draining the water out of the system much more quickly than it would naturally. So let's look more closely at the watershed. You can see the evidence that we are a hydrophobic society. We are afraid of water because we do everything we can to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So a typical commercial development is 95 to 100% paved over. So now you've shed that water out of the system, and you have to invest in pumps and other infrastructure to get the water back to the system from which you've drained it. And then in a housing development, and not as lush as it is in Asheville, but here you've got the home on the high part of the property. That's good, so it doesn't get flooded. We typically send the roof runoff down a downspout right past the vegetation of the landscape into the street, and then into the concrete-clad drainage, and the guns of Navarone shoot the water right out of the system. So we've replaced what was a very vibrant, living system that did not rely upon outside inputs to irrigate it and sustain it with one that is utterly dependent upon human intervention. So this is a typical landscape that you will see on the western United States that is dependent on drip irrigation. And you can see these rings of white. That is the salt that is deposited by our ever worsening water quality. Because as we deplete our groundwater table, it becomes more salty, and then we have these insane systems where we're importing water from the Colorado River 300 miles from river to Tucson and pumping it up an elevation of 1,000 feet. Costs us $4 billion to construct that system, costs us $80 million a year to keep it going. The bulk of that money goes to pay the electric bill, because when you move water, you consume electricity. And because we get the bulk of our electricity from burning coal, we're consuming a ½ gallon of water for every kilowatt hour of electricity consumed. The huge invisible water consumption of our energy consumption. Okay? So if you conserve energy, you conserve water. Now, because of our mismanagement of the watershed, where we're first over-pumping and over-consuming our local water resources at a rate more rapid than natural recharge, and then simultaneously we're paving over much of the watershed and thus crippling its ability to naturally recharge itself, we've got some serious changes going on. This is a photograph taken of the Santa Cruz River in the 1940s, 1945. That's the only bit of the river you can see. The rest of your view is blocked out by massive cottonwood, willow, mesquite, and canyon hackberry trees. Now look at this boulder in the foreground and this saguaro. Burn this image into your mind, and we're going to jump just 40 years to the mid-1980s. And this is what it looks like. There's the boulder and the saguaro. Okay? So we so rapidly depleted the upper reaches of the groundwater table that all that lush vegetation in the previous slide can no longer access the water, and it's died out. Thus we've lost the sponge, the element that infiltrates the water more quickly and holds the soil in place. So here's where we have the rivers of today. They're in our streets. It's no wonder that in too much of the US we don't consider rainwater a resource. We instead consider it a liability. And that's because we're rapidly draining it off of the surfaces where it would be a resource. Our gardens, our farms, the landscapes of the community, and we're rapidly sending it into the street where it's a liability for traffic. Now, there's a boon in this for the tourism industry. If we recognize the value of urban stormwater runoff and the kayaking industry that can tie into that. This is my neighbor, Matt Weber, kayaking down First Street in my neighborhood. So let's look at a shot from North Carolina. I took this from the Cooperative Extension website. So you too have the problem of excessive runoff flowing into the street, and oftentimes from the home landscapes adjoining the street where it's excessive runoff draining off the property. And here with all this sediment, not only do you have a flooding problem, but now you've got excessive sediment loads of your local creeks, which is definitely a problem for the fish populations and so on. So when I talk about harvesting the rain, particularly in the western United States, people typically laugh and they wonder what rain I'm talking about. What am I going to harvest? Well, I'm talking about every drop I can get a hold of. So even in the dry community of the perceived dry community of Tucson, more rain falls on the surface area of Tucson than Tucsonans consume of municipal water in an average year. So Asheville is well ahead of us on that. Yet how many folks, and how much of the municipality is looking to capture that water? There's a great abundant resource there to be tapped. So I see we can take one of two paths. We can take the path to scarcity, where we typically are draining water off-site very rapidly, and thus it's picking up sediment, flooding downstream areas, and we're even taking household wastewater, and this in particular talking about Graywater, the water from our bathroom sink, shower, bathtub, washing machine, but not the toilet or kitchen sink. That's black water. And we're sending that out of the system. So we steadily deplete the local water resources, the fertility of the soil, and so on. Things get worse over time. We're depleting the natural system. We become aware of that, maybe even scared. Maybe even so scared, we're scared to be in the city on the path to scarcity. Okay, thank you very much. But we can instead flip things around. Okay, we just tweak it a little bit. So instead what we're doing is we are taking, we're taking roof runoff and we're draining it into adjoining mulched planting areas, rain gardens. we send the runoff off of the access areas into these areas as well. So our feet, the cars, the traffic stays high and dry. And then we can send household wastewater, the graywater, to these same rain gardens. Rain gardens and graywater gardens can work with the same infrastructure. So when you have no rain, the graywater's there. When you and then when it does rain, the naturally pure distilled rainwater leaches out the salts introduced by the graywater and the other contaminants. So with this system, we're also capturing leaf litter and whatnot, so that's going back into the soil, recycling back into the plant, so we're enhancing soil fertility as well. So things get better over time. We become aware of that, maybe even happy, maybe even so happy we want to take these here buns and do a little bun dance on the path to a bun dance. So let's look at two different systems. Here's a path to scarcity and one to abundance. So this is a typical housing development, as you see in the U.S., excessively wide streets. There's no trees planted along the public right-of-way in too many of the new developments. They're only on the private land, thereby expanding the amount of hardscape. So with this, what goes on is you've got the sun hitting the asphalt, hitting the hardscape throughout the day. That hardscape absorbs the heat during the day and radiates it out at night. This has caused a 6-degree Fahrenheit rise in temperatures in Tucson, 10 degrees Fahrenheit rise in summer temperatures in Phoenix, Arizona, and you find this pattern throughout the United States. And this is not global warming, it's local warming, okay? It's caused entirely from local efforts, but it leads directly to global warming. Because in the summer, if temperatures are higher locally, you're going to turn on the air conditioner and run it more, or just the fans or whatnot. You're going to consume power to cool yourself. But by consuming that power, you're putting more burning fossil fuels and putting more carbon in the atmosphere. But here in Davis, California, the Village Homes development, they're doing the opposite. They purposely put in narrower streets. They're half the width of a typical development, thereby reducing the amount of hardscape that can absorb that heat. Then they crown it or raise it in the middle, drain the water to either side to passive water harvesting earthworks, rain gardens, or swales in which the street trees are planted. So the street becomes the passive irrigator of the street trees, which then grow to shade and cool the street and cool summer temperatures by 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
Amen.
Nice! Okay. So let's look more closely at just a home landscape. So if we're always planting on mounds, perhaps even like burial mound-like mounds, we're draining the water away and the topsoil. And we send the roof runoff right past the plants into the storm drain, and then the sediments clog that up. So this is a landscape on intensive care, particularly in the drier communities, because you're reliant then upon these intravenous-like drip irrigation emitters to replace the fluids we've drained from the dying patient. And we have to bring in regular care packages of fertilizer to replace the nutrients we've drained away. So here we're flipping it around, and this is a landscape using rain gardens, where you depress sections of the landscape to hold the water. It's mulched, it's a sponge to rapidly infiltrate the water. So you get all the rain. And this way, by creating this system, we can shift away from the model where throughout much of the not just the Western United States, throughout much of the United States, 30 to 50% of the potable drinking water consumed is used to irrigate landscapes. It's a total waste to be putting all kinds of resources to purifying that water and then send it into the dirt. So I'm advocating a different system where, at least for the landscapes, the rainwater is the primary irrigator, household graywater is the secondary irrigator in times of no need, and municipal or well water is only a supplementary source used in true times of need. Okay, that way we can move to abundance. And sorry, I'm going to shut this off for just a sec. I'll get right back to that. So I start by looking at harvesting the rain in the landscape because that's where it's easiest to begin, okay? Particularly in the North Carolina climate and environment, where you can use passive earthworks or rain gardens. The soil is your tank. The vegetation is the pump. So once you've stored the water in the soil, you access it in the form of peaches, other fruit, passively cooling shade, wildlife habitat, beauty, erosion control, air and soil filtration, and on and on. Okay? And it maintains itself once set in place. Okay? Now I will talk about tank systems and going into potable uses of water, particularly in the two-day workshop later in the week. But I start with landscaping because I like to start where it's easiest, simplest, cheapest. But let's look inside the home for a second. And let's look at where we consume another 30% of the potable drinking water that we consume on a daily basis. This gentleman is drinking from the toilet, just like dogs do. And because both he and dogs know what lies in the toilet bowl. It's drinking water. Okay? And what do we do to that drinking water on a daily basis? Yeah, we put the crap in it. So we have to spend billions of dollars getting the crap back out of the water. Okay? Now, I'm going to leave the toilet talk at that. I just wanted to plant a seed and remind us of what we're doing to our potable drinking water sources and why we sometimes have these water issues. So I'd be more than willing to talk to you individually about composting toilets and other strategies to address this, but let's move on to the rain. Okay, so how do we take the path to abundance? I lay out in my book 8 very simple, common sense principles of water harvesting and management. I'll give them very briefly to you here tonight while it's in more detail in the book. So the first one is long and thoughtful observation. You guys already know how to do this. You were born with all the skills to figure it out. You don't need school or my book or the workshop, but all that helps. You were born with the senses of sight, smell, touch, taste, the feeling in your gut, hearing. Use all your senses of observation to get out when it's raining and see what's going on. Where is the rain being lost too rapidly and causing erosion? Change that. Where is it gathering and life is being generated? Build on that. And even when it's not raining, you can look at the tracks. The next principle, just to move forward, okay, is you want to start at the top of your watershed and work down. All too often, people want to start at the bottom of the watershed. You probably see in new developments that there's a large stormwater detention-retention basin at the bottom. So what happens in that scenario? In that scenario, the water just flows right off the site, dehydrates the upper portions of the site, floods the lower portion of the site. So then how are you going to get the water back from the low point to the higher point? You got to get pumps, other expensive mechanisms to move that water. But if instead you use the free and easy distribution of water from the get-go, and you start infiltrating it at the high point and step it all the way down, after a rainfall, the whole site is evenly hydrated, and you don't have the flooding at the bottom. So here we've got a system of stepped rain gardens, infiltrating the water all the way. And when placing a tank, particularly an above-ground tank, you want to place that, when just looking at the topography, on the high part of the property. So you can easily do gravity feed into the tank and gravity feed out to more of the landscape. You can always get a pump to boost the system and have that regular pressure to send the water wherever you want. But by setting up a foundation here, relying on gravity, you can always move that water if the pump breaks or the power goes out. Okay? So this is a pattern that can be applied to an office complex, a townhome development, condominium, whatnot. This is a Milagro co-housing development in Tucson, Arizona, when under construction. So what's going on here is all the rooftops drain to this common landscape area. Now it's not finished, it's under construction. The whole thing has been divided up into a series of micro basins or rain garden basins. The general slope goes down this way. So when it rains, this will fill up with water. Should it overflow, it can overflow a slight dip in the sidewalk to this one, and then this one, and then this one. We've got that whole stepped cascading basin effect. So these are high clay soils, as you have quite a bit of around here. 2 inches of rain fell in less than an hour, and this is what it looked like. You could see the amount of water that was captured. But this could lead to a problem. This could become a mosquito factory because you've got standing water. And if you have standing water in our area for 3 days, that's enough time for mosquitoes to go from egg to adult. We do not want to be part of the mosquito problem. We want to be part of the mosquito solution. So you've got to bring back the sponge that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. So that's what we did. And with the sponge in place, we were able to infiltrate all the water from another 2-inch rainstorm in less than an hour. Okay? So we got 4 inches of mulch on the surface. We didn't even mix it in. We just put the mulch on the surface. And then we planted the living pumps of the vegetation. This is just a few months after planting. And this landscape, now that it's growing and you can't even see down there anymore because of all the fruit trees, it's designed to produce 100 pounds of organic produce per resident per year, irrigated entirely with rainwater and household wastewater. No potable drinking water. Yow! Okay, but it gets better because this system is also the flood control system for the development and the downstream parts of the community. So this is looking from above. You see all these squares with the numbers, those are the housing units. And then the shaded area is the common landscape broken up into the microbasins, and the circles are trees. There's no stormwater detention or retention basin at the bottom of the site. There's only a key to this plan. But even behind that key, there's no stormwater detention or retention basin. Okay? Because there's no runoff off of this site. We had a civil engineer add up the cumulative storage capacity of all these microbasins and found that it exceeded a conventional system by 10 times. Okay? Even in a biblical rain, we're not going to have runoff off of this site. Okay? But we're going to have a biblical harvest after that biblical rain because of all the water we're collecting. Okay? Hallelujah. Absolutely. Okay. All right. There's also no runoff from the parking lot because it's a porous pavement. And I'll show you that in just a sec. But the key here is that integration. The stormwater control system is also the passive and free irrigation system of the landscape that's been designed to not only be beautiful, but produce a bulk of the food for the residents living there. So it's also a system of food security, interspersed with many indigenous or native plants, so we're also enhancing the local ecosystem. Win, win, win. It slices, it dices, it makes your life better. Okay, so here's the porous pavement of the parking lot. And it's basically, underneath this is a plastic matrix of little cups that holds the gravel in place and allows fire trucks to go over it when fully laden with water, so they don't sink down into the ground. It's like a snowshoe effect. I give folks that have interest in that, I can talk more about that afterwards. But the main thing I wanted to say about porous pavements. Porous pavements is a paving material that infiltrates water, so it does not generate runoff. When people hear about porous pavements, they typically love the idea, and then they misdesign it. They send runoff from other surfaces to it to take care of the stormwater. That is not the intent of porous pavement. The reason for porous pavement is to ensure that the pavement surface does not generate runoff. It's not supposed to take runoff from other areas. Otherwise, what you're going to find, and this was a problem here, the runoff from this little bit of stabilized soil has sealed all the pores in this area of the porous pavement. So it's no longer porous. So you want that porous pavement to be a little higher and then drain its excess water off. And it won't collect sediment. Okay, next principle. Start with small and simple strategies. Why small and simple strategies?
Cheaper.
Yep, and if it's cheaper, along with smaller and simpler, you just might start! Okay? You do something big and complex, you'll probably just keep sitting there thinking about it and never go anywhere. So starting small and simple could be putting in a rain barrel, or it could be putting in some indigenous vegetation beside or within a water harvesting earthwork or rain garden. And when doing such a planting, so a rain garden would typically be a level-bottomed, mulched, vegetated area. When you're trying to figure out what do you plant within the rain garden or beside it, my answer to that is, go take a hike! Because a few of you were nodding off back there, so I want to wake you up. but also because I want you to take a hike. I want you to go out in the areas, the thriving parts of the local ecosystem where nobody's taking care of it, and see what naturally grows in the low spots that are periodically inundated with water and sediment. Whatever's thriving there is going to thrive in the basins of your rain gardens. And then see what is thriving in the higher, drier, better drained areas. That's what goes beside it, but not within it. And if you're planting exotics, say like fruit trees and whatnot, do not put them down here. Put them where their roots can access the harvested water, but the root crown stays high and dry, so you don't get crown rot. Okay? And here too, it's always wise with your clay soils to dig a hole with a shovel, fill it up with water, and see what happens. If the water drains out, you're good. If it doesn't drain out and you still have water sitting there, well, you're going to plant wetland species here because you've got a wetland. Okay? And the university and the cooperative extension have great information on plant lists that you can get off the web for this area in rain gardens. And okay, so I want you to also think like a tree. All too often people think, well, if I'm going to harvest water about a plant, I got to make the basin of the rain garden right here. No, the bulk of the water uptaken by the tree, this arc represents the water uptaken by the tree, is absorbed well beyond the drip edge of the tree. So you can have these earthworks and rain gardens, scattered all about. And then you just say to the tree, as a water farmer in Africa taught me, look, you are here, but the water is over there. Now I want you to go and get it. And it will. Okay, so where do we want to put these rain gardens and these earthworks? Okay, I think we need to put these in the oasis zone around the homes where we live. And I typically start within a 30-foot radius, because that's where we have the greatest amount of impact on the site. Could be negative or positive, our choice. And that's where we have the runoff coming off the roof, so we can greatly increase the amount of rainfall, and we potentially have gray water as represented by the dotted lines, being the subsurface pipe. In this instance, I would be planting my higher water use plantings here, where they get rainwater runoff, surrounding runoff, and gray water. And my lower water use plants I would put here that just get rainwater and runoff from the roof. And this is how we can grow living air conditioners and heaters. Because at maturity, the trees would look like this. Okay, trees are a lot bigger here, a lot of them. So if you've got taller tree species, you don't put them right up against the house. You bring them back. Have the lower species here. This way, in the winter months, you get free heat. In the summer months, you get free shading. So this represents sun and shadow relationships around the house in the summer months. This is in the winter months. The sun rises and sets due east and west all year round, right?
No.
Awesome! I'm so glad you said no! Okay, it only rises and sets due east and west 2 days a year, spring and fall equinox. The rest of the time the sun is rising and setting to the north of due east and west in summer, and it's rising and setting to the south of due east and west in winter. Keeping in mind the sun pattern, having these trees planted on the east, north, and west side, we are shaded from the rising and setting sun all summer long in the hot months when we want that shade. But all winter long, the south side of the house is getting full exposure to the free heat and light when we want it. And thus, we're also making things possible to set up solar power and solar hot water heating. So you're getting the best of all worlds in all seasons. Okay? Just, again, by thinking a little bit more about how everything interrelates and works together. Okay. I think the next image is a big one, because it's taken a little while to move forward. Or, this isn't working anymore. There we go. Okay, so just to show here, also when you're selecting a house or going to build a house, just look at the orientation of the home. The city of Davis, California did a very interesting study where they compared two identical two-story apartment buildings. One was this orientation with the long wall facing south, and then the short walls facing the rising and setting sun to the east and west. And then the other building was like this, with the long walls facing east and west and the short wall facing south. So they put two minimum maximum thermometers in each building. and monitored the temperature fluctuations throughout a full year, never turning on any heating or cooling systems. And they found that this orientation inside the home, it was 17 degrees warmer in winter and 24 degrees cooler in summer than this orientation. That is huge! And I lost my battery. That costs nothing! Nothing! But such a dramatic reduction in energy consumption and such a dramatic increase in human comfort without mechanical systems. But we almost universally ignore the building's orientation in relationship to the sun. Okay. So if we start to pay attention to that, we got great things can happen. And you guys have more of a need for heating. So friends in Boulder, Utah had a mobile home that was oriented like the one on the right here. Whoops. Oh, no. I think with that little burst of enthusiasm. Okay, here we go. It's oriented like this. They're paying $300 a month just to heat the mobile home enough to keep the pipes from freezing. All right? So they changed the orientation after I told them this little story. So they oriented it this way. Now they pay less than $50 a month to heat the mobile home, and not only the pipes not freeze, it's actually comfortable to be in there for a change. Okay. And of course, the trees in the pattern I showed you in the previous slide, that just further augments it, makes things work better. The next principle of water harvesting: slow, spread, and sink the flow of water. We don't want to just send it right out. We want to slow it and spread it. So I think what we need to do here is we need to get this to sink into our impervious headwaters. So if you all with me could repeat: slow it, spread it, sink it. Slow it, spread it, sink it. Yes! All right, so let's look at some examples: slowing, spreading, and sinking it. And the machine is bogging down, so... All right, there we go. So in this example, very rapid drain out of the system, erosive. And on the other one, we've got more forested upper parts of the watershed, slowing it down. And just to tell you a nice little happy story, I visited the most populated desert of the world, Rajasthan, in 2005. And there went to an area where they had so deforested the watershed and so overpumped the local groundwater that they had killed 5 rivers. So 850 villages came together to reforest the watersheds, to start creating a bunch of water harvesting earthworks and get more efficient in their water use and management. And in about 10 years, they actually brought back all 5 dead rivers.
What country is that?
As in India and Rajasthan. And the point of that story, the moral of that story, is what they did is they started to put more water back into the system than they took out. And that's the key to water sustainability. So here's an urban landscape in Tucson, very small yard. This is the property line. They are taking rainwater from the roof, directing it to the rain gardens here. Then they're taking household gray water and with subsurface pipes directing that to the same basin. So it works in wet and dry times. And it's now irrigated entirely with rainwater and household gray water. Here in North Carolina, from the Cooperative Extension, got these photos. Here are some rain gardens. By depressing this section of the lawn, it's now able to absorb much more of the rainfall, plant indigenous flowering species. Here's another example beside a building, and reducing flooding at the same time, flooding of downstream areas. Okay, this is in Los Alamos, New Mexico, on a slope site. You can terrace it out, make these level terraces to slow the flow of the water off the system. And here they use an abundant geologic urban geologic formation known as urbanite, or broken up sidewalk chunks, to make the retaining walls. And so it's turning a waste into a resource at the same time. And what I love about dry stacked walls, where you don't mortar up the joints, is it's really good. If your system gets oversaturated with water, it can be released through the joints. So you don't have hydrostatic pressure building up as you would with a mortared wall. Okay, another example is here. This is in a much wetter climate than you. This is Occidental California. They get 60 inches of rain a year. This is a swale where the slope's going this way. They made a basin, and then the dirt they dug out from the basin, they made a berm. It's 80 feet long, 2.5 feet wide basin, 2.5 feet wide berm. 12 volunteers built this on a Saturday morning. And this harvests 600,000 gallons of rain a year. If you were to buy a tank for the same capacity, you would pay about $600,000. Because the tanks on average are about $1 a gallon. So I'm just trying to reiterate the point of how key it is to look at the soil as our potential tank, and then the vegetation is the pump. I will get to tanks, but the reason I'm just pushing home this whole idea of the soil is all too often when we think of rainwater harvesting, we go right to tanks, and we forget the cheapest and easiest. Okay. And then they dry farm peaches, plums, and other fruit trees on either side of that swale. This is in a canyon outside Tucson, Arizona, where the Civil Conservation Corps put in this check dam across the drainage flowing this way. It was just bare bedrock before. By creating this net in the flow of the water, they created a sand tank. All the sediment flowing down backed up behind it. The seeds were caught in that, and the vegetation grew. So by slowing the flow of the water through the system, they've created an ephemeral spring where none existed before. Before, the water would just flash through the system. Now, by slowing it down, the water's captured in the sand tank, and it seeps out for a period of weeks or even months after the rain. Okay? So do you all realize by seeing this, you have the power to create a spring? You have the power to create a spring! I love that. Okay. Now, if you don't have bedrock, it's not as easy, but you can, in this climate, you have more possibilities than we do. Okay, the next principle is you always want to have an overflow for your system and use the overflow as a resource. All too often, I find tank systems, particularly rain barrels, have no overflow. So the water comes in, and then where does it go? Okay, and it just starts overflowing chaotically. We want to have the overflow pipe at least as big as the inflow pipe. And don't just send the overflow pipe anywhere. Send it to a rain garden, or send it to another tank, and then the overflow from that to a rain garden. So everything's used as a resource. And zigzag the flow from rain garden to rain garden. So you're slowing, spreading, and sinking the flow of water. Okay. Then we want to maximize living and organic ground cover. Bring back the living sponge. So over time, as more and more roots grow, as more and more mulch accumulates on the surface, it more quickly infiltrates the water. So it gets better over time. Soil fertility is enhanced. The hydrology of the system is enhanced. This is what we want. Regenerative systems that just get better and better on their own after you help set up the system. Okay, working with nature, not against it. This gentleman's working against nature. Ah, darn it. Let's go back. He is literally vacuuming his landscape. Okay? He's vacuuming up that nasty leaf drop. Okay? Whereas this guy, he's cutting up the prunings from the tree and dropping it right under the tree. Because the best mulch for any plant is that plant's own tissue. So if you mulch the surface, you can more quickly infiltrate the water, but you also reduce water loss to evaporation by up to as much as 50%.
Is that Darren on the right?
No, that's my brother.
It looked like it.
So the idea here is the more organic matter we have in the soil, the organic matter in the soil is the food for all the soil life. And the more soil life, the more life we can generate atop the soil. And where do we live? We live atop the soil, so that's good for us. All right, so the next principle, we want to maximize the beneficial relationships. Doggone it. So we want to set up these systems so they do more than just harvest water. They're more dynamic. So if you put in a rainwater tank or a rain garden with some trees, place them on the east or west side of your house so they passively shade and cool you from the rising and setting sun in the summer months. Hey, living air conditioner. Set up a vegetation that not only looks good, but also produces food. On-site pantry. And then one that is also great for wildlife habitat. Enhance the ecosystem. The tank and the earthwork being on site act as community flood control. In Los Angeles, California, they're actually subsidizing these systems in schoolyards and private property and they're taking the money out of the flood control district to do it. Because the more people that harvest the water upslope, the less flooding there is downslope. This is my brother and I's site in downtown Tucson. This is our winter garden. We plant in sunken mulch basins and we raise the pathways to drain the water into those basins. And then here is our 1,200-gallon rainwater tank that takes the water off the roof and into the tank, and we use gravity in, gravity out with the faucet right here. No pumps or moving parts. So this tank does a lot more than just harvest water. We put it on the western property boundary, so it doubles as an 11-foot long section of property fence right on the fence line. In addition, and the first thing is, all the water for this garden comes from direct rainfall and the water stored in the tank, okay? Even in the dry community of Tucson. Now, so it's property fence as well. In addition, we put it in front of the neighbor's rental unit's bay window. So it's now a privacy screen, okay? What's more, that's a very cheap place to rent because it's very poorly maintained and the wiring is horrific. So it's excellent to have a concrete tank full of water as a fire break between us and that fire source, okay? And on top of that, this tank, along with the tree on the west side of the garden, act as a mini mountain range on the west side of the garden. So the sun sets on this garden by 3 o'clock. So this photograph was taken in the morning, but by 3, the shadow is right here. So when ambient temperatures are higher in the afternoon, plants are heat stressed, they're evapotranspiring more water, we cool them off because we put the garden in that microclimate. So we use less water. So that's how you get a lot more for less, just by integration. And the last principle is the same as the first, long and thoughtful observation, or said another way, the feedback loop, because nothing's static. You always want to go back, see what's working, build on that, see what's not working, change that. You evolve with the system, you learn with the system. So now I just want to show you a few examples of more of this. Okay, gray water harvesting. Again, gray water is the water coming from your shower, bathtub, washing machine, but not the kitchen sink, dishwasher, or toilet. That's considered black water. And there's more health risks with that. But gray water in Arizona, New Mexico, it's legal statewide. Not only that, both Arizona and New Mexico will pay you to do it. You can get a $1,200 tax credit if you start to do this. So maybe push local authorities to do the same. I list all this on the gray water harvesting page of my website. So here, my brother is doing a very simple gray water system. If you have, it's hard to access your plumbing or you don't want to do it, you just throw a hose over a branch of a tree that's planted within a mulched basin, and you can get a garden nozzle with all the massaging shower head settings. So this gray water shower was $15. Now he's not showering with gray water, that's gross. He's showering with the regular municipal water, but when it goes over his dirty body, it becomes gray water, okay? And plants love gray water because all that dirt on you, that's fertilizer. So it goes right there into the plants. Okay. And the soil filters the water along with the soil microorganisms. And people ask, well, what do you do about the neighbors? And well, you wear a bathing suit. That's why we call it that. Okay. And then we invite them on in. Okay. So what if you want to access the gray water within your home? Okay, so let's say you've got a sink against an exterior wall. You want to have the P-trap and the vent stack between the interior of the home and the outside. This ensures no critters ever get in because of the water in that P-trap. And no odors. But if you set the system up right, there should be no odors anyway. So you then make sure your pipe drains a 1/4 inch minimum per horizontal foot. So you always are draining the water. It never sits in the pipe. And it drains right into a level-bottomed mulch basin. It's a rain garden. It's a gray water garden. It's the same thing. Okay? Now, I do not advocate most of the time, I do not advocate the storage of gray water in a tank. Because if you do that, it becomes black water, goes septic, and it stinks. All right? And then you have to invest in a pump to get the water back out of the tank. All right? Now there are some applications where that can make sense, like apartment complexes, but for most single family residences, this is the system I advocate. So it's very low tech, very easy. The water just comes in here, and you don't buy a filter, you grow one. So the plants, the soil microorganisms, they digest the bacteria, the organic matter, and then there's your irrigation system. Okay, and you got to have perennial plantings there, not annuals. So you've always got the roots there, always using the water. Evergreens are best. And it's no problem with food plants as long as the food is up here or up here and not in direct contact with the water. So fruit trees are great, artichokes are great, tomatoes on a trellis are great. Of course, a tomato is an annual, so you plant that with a perennial fruit tree. You don't want lettuce or tubers that are coming in direct contact with the gray water. Okay. I want to say one other thing about Arizona and New Mexico. If you harvest gray water according to the best management practices, which I list on my website and that the state advocates, you don't even need an inspection. And there's no permit, and there's no fees.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I want to entice more people into harvesting gray water. And I think the key to that is the gray water stub out. Cottonwood, Arizona, Sierra Vista, Arizona, and it looks like Tucson, Arizona will soon follow suit, mandate that every new home must be built with gray water stub outs. That's just a section of pipe that is put in when the home is built, so you can come back later and connect it up with the gray water system to send the gray water out to the landscape. So this is what it would look like connected. There's a little three-way valve. So you're there using the sink and you're like, okay, I'm going to use bleach. So I'm going to send that water to the sewer because it's toxic. I'm not going to contaminate my own landscape. I'm going to contaminate the community landscape. Okay. So, and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to use the good stuff. Now I'm going to use the right soaps that are food for the plants and don't kill anything. So now I'm going to turn the valve and send the water to the landscape. Everything's good. This way, people don't have gray water paranoia. All too often, people have the paranoia when they think, yeah, I'm going to start harvesting gray water, and I'm going to have to make a major lifestyle change. This way, you don't. You can continue to use those favorite toxins and send the water to the appropriate place, and then slowly start to educate yourself about what still works for you, but is not toxic for you or the environment. Okay. So it's also key to make this look good. This isn't the best looking thing. This is a retrofit, but it's key here that when you mark where the water goes in the valve. So you don't go, okay, I'm going to use bleach, and you go down to, which direction? Okay? You got to know which way to turn the valve. Okay? But to make it look slicker, I like this installation coming up. Here you walk right into the bathroom and you're like, man, these people harvest gray water. And you want to give them a big hug and a kiss because that's what it happens. You know, when you start harvesting gray water, you get excited about it. You want to do that with people. Just trying to lure you in even more. Okay, so here it's marked landscape or sewer. They can mark it whichever way. If you don't want to look at it there, they wanted to celebrate it. If you don't want to do that, you can put it in the cabinet so no one sees it. Okay, now another installation I'm going to show you, they put in a bathtub. And they raised the elevation of the bathtub so that they could put in a trap door for the valve. And let's see, I think my batteries are dying. Try it this way. Okay, there we go. So the height, they raised it as the height of the tile. And they reach in there, there's a trap door. So when they want to move the valve, and you don't move this valve that often, there it is. You can see it. All right, you're going to be great. Thanks, John. So next one. And it might go slow. If you press it once, just wait. So this is a great thing to do for a washing machine. This is my brother and I's washing machine. We have it out on the back porch. So every time we're standing here loading the clothes with wash, we grab the drain hose and stick it in a different pipe and move it in a clockwise fashion every time we do a load of wash. So what I love about this, it gives you a lot of control, okay? And I am a control freak when it comes to gray water harvesting, okay? Because if I notice the orange tree needs extra water, I want to be able to leave the hose on there to give it extra water. If you have a more conventional system, here you can set it up so we've got the drain water pipes going to the various fruit trees, the gray water pipes, But if you're going to use bleach on occasion, you have one more pipe, and that says sewer. Okay, so again, you've got all options. And then when it says sewer, in parentheses say local groundwater table, local creek, just so you keep that in the consciousness. Okay. Now, here's how you can set up a graywater basin that you don't see, or how you can turn your septic system into a more sustainable irrigation system. So this is a septic leach field. Instead of a 4-inch perforated pipe in a gravel-filled trench, this is an infiltration chamber. And what that looks like on the inside is this. So it's the really good models are 3 feet wide and a foot tall. So it's this huge void space where it's harder for roots to grow into that and clog it, because it's much bigger than that 4-inch perforated pipe. So no bottom, louvered sides, the water perks out real quick. And the key thing is we don't want this any taller than 13 inches because we want to infiltrate that water in the highest part of the topsoil where we have more root life, more soil life using the water. If we discharge it too deep, we're not using it, and it's more likely to contaminate the local groundwater table and so on. Okay, whoops, so if I go back to, so you could plant fruit tree, fruit tree, fruit tree. Not cottonwoods, not sycamores, not stuff that grows in the creeks and the running water. That could clog it. But the fruit trees you could plant on either side, so your wastewater then becomes the free irrigator of those trees. All right, this is in Portland, Oregon. I love this drinking fountain. You take a drink of water, you look up, and you see a diagram of the watershed that provides Portland with its drinking water. Okay, that connection. I think we need to reconnect. Where does our water come from? But we also need to reconnect with where does our water go to. So this next slide is, let's see if, there we go, is where we send our rainwater and graywater, even to the chickens. So we grow all this without any potable drinking water. And I know it's easier to do that here than in Tucson, but it's amazing to do that in Tucson. So this is how we've started to convert the public right-of-way. You start to get it happening on your land, work out the kinks, get it working right, and then spread the word, okay? Spread the activism. So this is the public right-of-way, a 20-foot right-of-way between our property line and the curb when we bought our property in 1994. And then 2 years later, we started planting. We organized an annual tree planting project. We've planted over 1,100 trees, or helped with our neighbors plant over 1,100 trees in our neighborhood since 1996. And we try and get people to plant the water before they plant the trees by creating these rain gardens first. So burn this image into your mind, and now let's see what it looked like in 2006 from the same vantage point. Okay? Yeah! Can't even see the house from here. So when we moved here in the previous slide, we only had pigeons. No native bird life, because there was no habitat for the native birds. So 95% of these species here are indigenous to the Tucson Basin. So we now have over 24 native bird species that weren't there before, that are now residents or long-term visitors. Because like that movie Field of Dreams, you know, build it and they will come. Well, no dead baseball players. Instead, we got a bunch of native birds coming. We are now building community. The neighbors love to walk up and down here. They consider it the neighborhood botanical garden. It's leading to cooling of the neighborhood as we get more vegetation, a lot more pleasant to be out and about. And it's community flood control. Because what we realized is that the streets are ephemeral waterways. When it rains, the streets flow with water. They are creeks, ephemeral creeks. So let's treat them as such. So we started to cut the curb to get the water from the street into the street side tree basins, because the street is raised in the middle and drains the adjoining side. So it's amazing the amount of water that you can harvest. So the average residential street in Tucson, which is about 36, 38 feet wide, drains 1 million gallons of runoff per mile per year. Okay, let's look at Asheville. A much narrower street, 20 feet wide, drains 2 million gallons of runoff per mile per year in Asheville. Okay, so you can see that literal dehydration of the community going on through our public infrastructure. But we can flip that around and send the street runoff not down the street, but into street side rain gardens and plantings. So the street irrigates the street trees. and then you don't have the flooding downstream as you did before. So let's look at how some communities around the country are doing that. Yeah, go ahead and hit the floor. Oh, well, first, and go to the next. Eat your rainwater. That's what my brother's doing. That was grown with rainwater. Here's my sister-in-law eating the mesquite pods grown from the native food-bearing tree, the mesquite tree, grown in the street-side basin with the curb cut irrigating it. So this tree was planted 10 years ago, and now we're eating the produce. And we also get honey from our backyard bees, syrup from the cactus fruit, the mesquite flower, from which we ground that up, all European olives and other goodies, all grown on rainwater in the public right-of-way. So here's food security going on. Okay, we want to get more go back when we want to get more people enticed on this. So it's hard to grind mesquite seed pods into edible flour on your own. So we got a hammer mill, put it on a trailer so we can take it around to different neighborhoods. So you can grind 5 gallons of whole mesquite pods into 1 gallon of edible flour in 5 minutes. And it sells from $9 to $15 a pound. It's an amazing cash crop. What's more, it's naturally sweet, and it slows the body's intake of sugars, so it's great for people with hypoglycemia and diabetes. Okay, so next one, but that's not enough to make it easy to do. You have to get people to taste it, to see how good it is. So we have celebration around this. We have mesquite pancake breakfast with prickly pear syrup. So guys like Garth here try it, and they get all excited. And they're like, I want more of this. And like, great! Plant a tree and a water harvesting earthwork and do it. So then they come back the next year with the mesquite pods. So each year it's growing the communities to which we go and do this. And we got live music and all this, all kinds of other stuff. Because you got to celebrate, you got to make it fun. Because what's the point, you know? The point is to have fun. Okay, next slide. And do good work at the same time. Or at least for me. So, you get all excited about this like we have, and then you want to take it to the streets! Literally! Okay, so go back. Go back again. No, we're going forward there. One more. Go back one more. Okay, so here's an intersection. Cars are ripping through the neighborhood, so we put in a traffic circle to calm traffic. And we got the neighbors together to plant the traffic circle instead of hiring someone to do that. Why? Because then you get the community involved. And then you get to know more of your neighbors as you do it. So it's not a neighborhood of strangers, it's a neighborhood of friends, or at least acquaintances. So it's more of a community. And then notice that we made all the plantings lower than the top of the curb. This way, we hold all direct rainfall. Okay, no curb cuts because this is on the high part of the street. So we don't want to drain the water out. This has reduced impervious pavement of the intersection by 26%. And as it grows, we'll reduce the heat island effect. Then we wanted to celebrate this. So we got the neighbors out to help paint the intersection. This is like what's going to be going on in June with the Asheville Convergence. And you get more information at ashvillage.org. Yes. We had live music going on, food, and next slide. Here, got it. This is what it looked like afterwards. So this intersection really slowed traffic at this point because it represents the prickly pear through the 4 seasons and flowering, fruiting, and whatnot. So it's great. All these people are coming by and like, traffic circle planting. What is this? And people would just stop and gather, and all the people that worked on it would come together too. So it was amazing. And then things like that happened. Amazing. Okay. Unfortunately, we used the wrong paint, so it faded after a month. Okay? So my advice to you all is use the right paint. The other thing that happened is then we got these murals happening on the auto parts store. It just starts to grow things. You plant that seed and it just starts to grow out. But here what I wanted to show you is how water lingers when you create the nets. Where the sponges are of mulch and vegetation, the snow lingers. Where we don't have it, it's melted and evaporated off. Okay, it's why do you have more vegetation on north-facing slopes? It's because you don't have as much evaporation. You can see it happening here in the urban environment. All right, next. There we go. All right, so this is snow harvesting in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's kind of hard to see, but what's going on here is the street is going like this. All the runoff from the snow melt is flying down the street. So this guy, after reading my book, got all excited, and he's like, oh, I'm going to harvest that! So he started shoveling snow into the street, made a snow berm, okay? And so that snow berm captures the water coming down the street, kicks it into his yard, and this big rain garden he has, this big basin. And so he didn't have to irrigate after this. He fully saturated his rain garden with water with the snow melt. And what's great, you can't get busted for this. Because if anyone comes to check it out, the snow is melted by the time they show up. All right. Here is a traffic circle put in where the street is the low point. So it's a flush curb. So the water just flows over, some of it perks in, surplus continues on down. Next, see if... Okay. Mimic natural patterns. You can see, particularly in our area, that you have taller vegetation beside hardscape areas like the streets because it gets rainfall and runoff. In a very dry area, the only place you get taller vegetation than scrub is alongside this dirt road. Okay. So we're just mimicking natural patterns. Okay? Here in this neighborhood in Tucson, they have pullouts with a flush curb, so the water just flows over it, and this forces traffic to meander. Okay? So you can plant in the street, and you can use the street to irrigate the plantings. This is in Portland, Oregon, so closer to your climate. And here, this is a city-funded project, okay? Now, a lot of the stuff I've shown up to now has been citizen-driven, okay? It's the neighbors wanted to do it, so they made it happen. They got grants or worked with the city to get money. This is different. In Portland, the city drove it, okay? So they got a progressive mayor and council. They wanted to see this happen in neighborhoods like this. They had a lot of flooding problems of basements. So what they decided to do is start to capture some of the runoff higher in the watershed. So you can see the strip of lawn here. That's where the curb used to be. They put the curb out. They cut the curb, so now the runoff from the street goes in to irrigate this beautiful rain garden. Okay? And they put they're putting them all throughout Portland. And they start high in the watershed, not at the low point. Okay? So they can slow spread and sink it throughout. And they've started in the neighborhoods where flooding's been a problem. So not only does it beautify the area, it combats flooding at the same time. And they can take money out of the flood control district to help pay for this. So flood control and transportation departments work together. Yeah, go there. Here's in Seattle, Washington. Again, very similar climate. You guys get about 37 inches of rain a year. They're getting about 36. So this is part of the C Streets project before they did the work. And next slide. We'll see what it looked like once they did the work. Same street. They narrowed the street. They reduced pavement by 11%. Then they put in a side, and by narrowing it, it gave them the room to make the street curvilinear, which I think makes for a much beautiful street, but it slows traffic, so we're getting multifunction. And then they put in a sidewalk, but only on one side of the street. So it gave them enough room to make these sunken, mulched basins. And notice that there's no raised curb. It's a flush curb, so you don't concentrate water and make it more erosive. We keep sheet flow. Next slide. A couple of years after this was done, this is what it looked like. And unfortunately, this is a bad photo because there's a bunch of people, but they're way back there. There's people all over this place when you go to the neighborhood because they love walking around. It's much more beautiful. They're starting to cool the area in summer. And the other great thing is they have reduced urban runoff by 98%. Okay? The other great thing is this doesn't cost any more money than a conventional curb and gutter system. But it's got so many more benefits. Okay? It's taking the path to abundance, not scarcity. Abundance. Okay. So, go back one. So on a more steep site, here's the drainage coming down. So they made a bunch of level terraces with check dams. Next slide. A year later, this is what it looked like. That is the living filter, the living sponge, the bioremediation. Okay, we're going to living systems here. Next slide. So they've so improved stormwater quality that the salmon populations are rebounding in the local creeks, whereas before they were dying off because with the urban runoff, it was like a Valdez oil spill every time it rained, just from the oil in the streets and stuff. This is in Village Homes, Davis, California, where people see this and they're like, oh yeah, I know what's going on. The landscape's draining to the street. No, it's the opposite. The street drains into the landscape, and this swale helps irrigate the trees planted along it by using this street runoff. Next slide. So the idea, raise your access ways, sink the planting areas, and plant within or beside them. In your climate, you probably won't plant in the middle of the trees. You'll plant right here on the edge. Next slide. And it might be a big one. This is in Portland, Oregon. Here people park on the street, so they have this little 2-foot strip that you can step out of when you get out of your car, so you don't step into a basin. It's key to make this convenient and work for everybody, so no one complains. Okay? And so these steel scuppers take the water into the basin, and the roots access that water. Next slide. Here on this street in Portland, nobody's parking. He's just stopped for a red light. So there's no pedestrian platform, but there's a curb cut to let the water in and irrigate the street trees. Next slide. This is in Australia, in a development that was under construction when I was there. What I thought was amazing here is they did a very simple shift. Throughout much of the US, I find that housing developments are built so the backyard walls and the backyard fences are what front the drainage ways or the waterways. But here they mandated in this development that every waterway must be fronted by the homes. And what that did is it turned the waterway not into an armpit that nobody cares about, but they turned it into the central amenity of the development. So the developer here had to revegetate the drainage because this is what everyone would be looking at. And they made a flush curb, not a raised curb. So the water flows as sheet flow much more calmly over into the waterway, and here's a mulched and vegetated bioswale that filters the toxins from the road before it then makes its way filtered into the waterway itself. Okay? So it's working much better. And the builder loves this because the builders found that they can sell the homes fronting the waterway for 25% more money than those that don't. Works for everybody. Next slide. All right. Much more arid climate. Put in a 1-rock check dam. Keep it small and simple. It's only 1 rock high but 5 feet wide. Slowed the flow enough in this eroding drainage so once the rains came, all this green was established. That is something in my climate. That's amazing in my area. Okay? So next slide. Just by slowing the flow of water, you can generate that life. This is a ranch in southeastern Arizona. When these ranchers bought the ranch, they wondered, what do the cattle eat? It was just bare bedrock everywhere. The erosion had been so severe. So they put in a bunch of check dams in the drainage, no taller than this. They put in 20,000 of them on 2,000 deeded acres. They slowed the flow of water enough that soil started to gather. He's pulling up a carpet of soil and grass that didn't exist before. Next slide. These check dams spread the flow of the water over more of the drainage way, so you get more soil-water contact, more infiltration of the water, slowing it down. And this has resulted in changing 2 creeks that only flowed a couple months out of the year to year-round flow. People hear about this, they're like, yeah, but you're robbing the water from the people downstream. Actually, these ranchers, their well levels have gone up, and so have all the well levels of their neighbors downstream, because they're putting more into the system than they take out of the system. Next slide. And the key to this, as with all of it, is you start at the top of the watershed and work down. So they started up there and started all the sub-drainages feeding it. Next slide. Okay. And here, outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, they made mulch berms after they had all these bark beetle infestations and the trees dying off. They cut down the dead trees, chip and mulched them, put the mulch on contour so water backs up behind it. This is the slope. Put the berms on contour, start at the top. Next slide. So after the rains, this became this. Okay? Bring back the living sponge. Next slide. And now tanks, real quick. Make your tank do more than hold water. This is the Santa Fe Children's Museum. And so the tank above ground is also this beautiful mural. Next slide. It's celebrating the water. This terrace patio is a rainwater tank that takes the water off the roof, feeds the tank, and then the water goes via gravity to irrigate the citrus trees below it. Okay, next slide. Some of these are big images, so it moves slow. All right, in Australia, I think this is an amazing story. 10 years ago, it was illegal to harvest rainwater in tanks in many of the large cities of Australia, even though much of the rural parts of the country, that was people's only source of water. So the reason it was illegal to harvest rainwater in tanks is because the municipal water companies made their money by selling the water. Okay? So the drought changed all of that. In Brisbane, Australia, the reservoir was at less than 20% capacity, meaning they were near catastrophe. So they looked at desalination plants. Too costly, couldn't implement it quick enough. They looked at large dam and large canal projects. Problem with those, they don't work in drought. Okay? Because you've got this earthen catchment that's going to absorb whatever rain does fall. So they turned to rainwater harvesting, because even in drought, you get some rain, and you get all that rain coming off your roof because it's impervious. So they started doing this system where they would put in these tanks hooked up to the outdoor faucets, washing machine, and toilets. The idea being you would use that water quickly and make room for more water when it did rain. So you didn't need to invest in such a large tank. And by going to the toilet, outdoor faucets, and washing machine, you didn't have to worry about filtering it to water quality. They mark all the outdoor faucets with a little sign that says rainwater. Okay? And they first rebated this. The government would pay up to half the system. Then they mandated it. You cannot build a new home without a system like this. Now, in 2 years, you went from almost no tanks to 1 out of every 8 homes in Brisbane having a system like this. And the amazing thing is they got the data, they modeled it, and they found that if every home and business gets a system like this, they will not need to enhance the local water infrastructure for 100 years at projected population growth. Here they were right on the verge of no water, and by conserving with these simple systems, they easily can go out another 100 years at their very rapid population growth. So it's amazing. And the last thing I'll just point out here is this is a little rain bank, a little gizmo that when your tank is empty of water, it kicks in city water, and then when you have tank water, it kicks in the tank water to your home. Okay, next slide. And you'd use these tanks for multifunction. These tanks are all on the property line as a privacy screen. Next slide. Or you can use a different style tank, large cylinder tanks. They're a privacy screen along the property line for the privacy on the deck. So it can look good too. Next slide. Big image must be coming up. And this is in Seattle, Washington. More celebrating of the rain. So in downtown Seattle, they are now narrowing the roads. They're bringing plantings out into the landscape. Here they've got terrace plantings, and they force the road at more of angles like this, and they have a huge community garden. So that's the drawing. You start to see it realized here where they put in a tank shaped like a hand. It's a big hand jutting out of the ground. So the rain comes off the condominium roof into the forefinger, fills up the tank. The overflow comes out the thumb into cascading terraces. Okay, next slide. It's bringing back the natural hydrology of the urban core. Steelhead salmon have returned to Portland, Oregon as they swim up the steel downspout in front of an office, insurance office, and the water's caught in the rain garden below. Next slide. And here outside the New Seasons Market, a grocery store, we're going to look at this in just a moment, but they've got the trees along the street being irrigated with the street runoff. Next slide. The parking lot water all goes into a big bioswale, comes off into the basin to irrigate the trees that will shade the parking lot as they grow and filter the contaminants. Next slide. But the most juicy part, I think, is this character standing right outside the coffee shop and patio. So this is the downspout coming off the roof with little steel clouds around it. And this is a massive shower head. So when it rains, it showers down on this guy made out of recycled parts. And the water is caught in the rain garden below. But as it goes over him, he's got this umbrella made out of old propellers. And it's kinetic. So the moving water starts to whip this umbrella around. And all of a sudden, he's doing this little dance. This little abundance dance. So jumping back to a drier climate. if we start creating more of these rain gardens and whatnot, if we start conserving more water with tanks, so we're using rainwater rather than pumped water and the municipal water, we're going further so that we're able to rehydrate our local water resources rather than dehydrate them. In this arid climate in Africa, this is a play pump, and the water table is shallow enough that you can use the power of kids whipping the merry-go-round to pump the water up into the rain tank above. So we really, I think, as we deplete our local water resources, as we contaminate our local water resources, the low-lying fruit, the shallow water table that's so easy to access, we're losing the ability to cheaply, efficiently, and joyfully access the water in this sense. So all the strategies I've been talking about help us flip that around. Not contaminate, but regenerate. Next slide. Okay, so to wrap it up here, I've shown you a lot of potential. If you come to the 2-day workshop, we'll go into a lot more of the details of how you realize all this. But to really be water sustainable, you want to live within a site's water budget. You do this simple calculation, length times width of your site in feet gives you square foot, gives you the area in square feet. Multiply that by annual rainfall in feet. Here it's 3, because you get about 36 inches of rain. Multiply that by 7.48 to convert cubic feet to gallons. That is your site's water budget. You don't want to consume more water than falls on your site. Next slide. But you got to take it a step further. See, are you losing water to runoff? You got to subtract that from your budget. Are you gaining water from run-on, water running onto your property, and you're keeping it on property? You can add that to your budget. Next slide. And to move away from the math, because people get blurry-eyed on that, and make it visual. Let's say you've got 9,000 gallons coming off your roof in an average year. And you guys got a lot more water than that coming off your roof, because you got a wetter climate. But in my climate, if you had 9,000 gallons coming off, that would be enough to sustain 3 low water use native shade trees, 20 feet tall. And you could just use gravity to send it to the rain gardens, no moving parts. But if I wanted a higher water use plant like a citrus tree, I'd need to supplement that with gray water in the dry times, because in my climate, the fruit trees aren't adapted to the drought in the dry season. And if I wanted a lawn, that's all I'd get. Okay? This is trying to get the relationship, the feedback loop of how it all works, all right? Now, how do you get more for less? What if I want these trees, that fruit tree or the lawn, with my 9,000 gallons of water, but I want more than that. I want more than just irrigating the vegetation. What if I want 750 loads of clothes washing? Okay, well, if I send that roof runoff first to the clothes washer, and then the gray water from the clothes washer to the landscape, I get it all! Okay? And what if I don't want to wash my clothes? I just want to shower. I get 900 5-minute showers with that 9,000 gallons of water, and I irrigate the landscape. Yes! Okay, next slide. So integrate your rainwater and gray water harvesting. And it all begins with conservation. Reduce first. Okay? So let's say you're a high water use household using 370 gallons of water, per person per day. Go back one. You'd only have 24 days of water with that water coming off your roof. But if you can conserve and only use 114 gallons of water a day, you get 78 days of water. But I don't really think that's conserving. 20 gallons per person per day. Now that's conserving, and it's easy to do actually if you get the efficiencies in. You do that, that 9,000 gallons of water coming off your roof will last 450 days. Okay? Conservation first. So then to finish it, the idea is we want to move away from the scarcity to abundance. I've shown you guys a lot of ways to do this. If you want more information, I highly recommend you go to my website, harvestingrainwater.com. I have lots of free information there, including information on gray water harvesting, appropriate soaps to use, what not to use, and I highly recommend you get my book. It's actually a great read, full of resources on how to harvest rainwater, gray water, and do it integrated so you get the living air conditioner and heater and all of that. And I got it for sale today, $25, no tax. This one won't come out till May 1st, but that's the one, that's the best. And lastly, if you want more information, this Thursday and Friday we're having the workshop on rainwater and graywater harvesting. We'll actually do it. We'll go into a lot more detail. And also have this great, many more great events coming in sustainability, beekeeping, natural building, on and on, so you guys can read that. And the organizers here can give you more information on all of that. Thank you so much. And if you guys got any questions, I'll take like just a few, but don't feel rooted to your chair. You know, get around and move. So there's one there.
When it comes to runoff from the roof and then from parking lots, which are, talking about asphalt, so there's probably some kind of chemicals that are coming off with it. So how does that affect the land, or do you really want to? How do you get around it? Do you want to build a roof?
Yeah. So the question is, what do you do about asphalt roofs and streets and the toxins coming off of that? So my approach on that is, it's already in the system. All right. So what we can do when we re-roof our house is to put on a metal roof that's non-toxic, or an elastomeric roof coating that's non-toxic. I list sources of that on my website. But in the meantime, you have it. It's there. The water's already in the system. It's not a problem for the plants. All right? It might be for us, but it's not for the plants. That's again why I usually start with the landscaping. Okay?
You showed us a lot of examples of what you're doing in Tucson.
Yep.
Is Phoenix going to be employing any of this? Because I know they've got a bigger problem with that many more people and in a drier climate.
They're starting, but they're behind. They're behind us, but they're starting. Every community is starting to see the value in this, but it's that slow change because it's a new way of doing things. But Portland and Seattle, I think they're the most progressive. And along those lines, actually, glad you said that. So I've got a whole section of my website under rainwater harvesting info and resources. You click on that button, you'll get a table of contents, and then click on water harvesting demonstration sites. Because I list by city and country demonstration sites all over the place. So if you want to start to move your local authorities in this direction, they're scared of it's new. But you say, no, look at these communities. Look what they're doing. It's working. Here's all the data on it. I've got tons of photos and information. So that's what you take forward to them. They don't have to build a new wheel. It's already been built. Yeah.
You show a lot of systems that go to what I call secondary use inside a household. Do you advocate drinking water?
Yeah. I do. But with this talk, I don't start there because it's usually too big a leap for most people. So an amazing free document is called Guidance on the Use of Rainwater Tanks. It's by the state of South Australia. And you can download it for free. I link to it on my website. But it's amazing. They've done all these studies comparing the health of school children growing up on municipal water to school children growing up on rainwater. And the kids on rainwater, they're doing awesome. Okay? So it's just that you need to have some common sense strategies. I list a whole other set of principles for cistern systems in my book, like you don't want sunlight, insects, or critters getting into the water. There's some simple filtration systems for that. You want to outlet your tank with a pipe that's 4 inches off the bottom of the tank so you don't have the sludge going out the pipe because the heavy metals are going to gather up in the sludge, stuff like that. Yeah, and I can go into more details, but yeah, as long as you've got a safe system set up, and test your water before you drink it. If it needs filtration, put in a filtration system. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a spring system in my house, and it overflows, and I just keep it on. When it's drier, it's a little bit lower. If you use it, should I turn it off? It's basically at a certain level, and it just keeps going through. And then some of it out. Should I turn it off? Would there be any benefit to turning it off and letting it?
If you've got a natural spring or you've tapped into a natural spring, that's just nature's release of surplus water. So let it go. It's no problem. Now, one thing you might want to do if your spring goes dry seasonally, you might want to create a tank or a pond below to capture some of that water, so when the spring stops flowing, you still have stored water. That's the only thing I might think about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This material was used in some of the towns. You said it captures water and is strong enough for fire trucks to go over.
Yeah.
Is that usable in a home situation, or is it
Yes.
affordable?
Yes, it's very affordable. It's expensive in its installation, but you can do the installation. It's very easy. Oh yeah, sorry. He was asking about gravel pave, which is the permeable pavement surface I showed in the slide at the co-housing development. It's the matrix of little plastic cups on top of landscape fabric. So I linked to that on the porous pavement section of my website, but it's very easy for people to install. It's expensive for large developments because the cost is in the labor installing it. It's cheaper material-wise than asphalt. It's more expensive-wise in installation. So for a homeowner doing it themselves, it's great. And honestly, you don't need it. All you need is landscape fabric and put gravel on top of that.
Well, we've done that and used that in several different places.
Okay.
And also, we found it cools our outside temperature of our home at least 10 degrees.
Compared to an asphalt driveway. Yeah. The reason for that matrix of cups is so to spread the weight out of heavy equipment and stuff. If you don't have that at home, don't worry. Wait, there's a question here first, and I'll come back. Yeah.
So, you said that kitchen sink water was black water, but I wash my dishes with basil and then carry it out the front door and throw it on the plant.
That's because you're awesome. I'm not saying that. I'm just covering my behind. Okay. So I harvest my kitchen sink water, and I personally consider kitchen sink water dark gray water. Okay. But most authorities, including the state of Arizona and New Mexico, considers it black water. And they consider it that because they're watching out for the lowest common denominator, people that aren't conscious of what they send down the drain. Okay? So for you who is conscious, no problem. Yeah. Meaning that don't send toxins down, don't send a lot of grease and fat, and if you've got organic matter, don't use the chipper shredder under the sink. Get rid of that. What do they call that? Garbage disposal. Yeah, what is it? Garbage disposal? No! There's something wrong with that term. So get rid of that, and you put your organic matter into a compost bin. Don't send it down the drain. Because there is no away. You cannot throw anything away. It all comes back.